I call this connected collaboration because the word collaboration gets thrown around a lot, but without real connection that play can create, there's other ways to create connection. We have to build trust. We have to build understanding. We have to really think about the relationships that we have at work to really engage in what we call connected collaboration. And we want to make sure that we're doing this by maintaining a sense of playfulness and exploration. And this can be especially difficult when we're remote because as humans, there's this phenomenon that play is homeostatically regulated. It's part of what we do, just like breathing. And so when we're together, we're naturally going to engage in it. But when these non-human environments are all around us, these screens, these keyboards, these wires, they tend to block and get in the way of our playfulness. And so we have to be intentional about how we bring that, how we design it, and how we encourage it. So we're going to demonstrate some of it. And then my biggest point I want you to take away is that you can design these things. You can be intentional about them, and they don't have to be prescriptive. You don't have to go and download a template or do a thing. It's just being mindful and reserving the time and inviting people in. In fact, I just had someone on my podcast recently, and they were talking about how important it was to craft a question that attracts people in. Her name is Peggy Holman, and she wrote the Change Handbook. She's really fantastic. An OG in the facilitation space. She's been at it for over 40 years. So I'm Douglas, if you haven't figured that out by now, and I design change, and I want to help you think about designing change. And so my colleague Shannon wasn't able to join me today, but these slides are pretty basic, but if you wanted to, you can snap this QR code and download them. And also for the people who are watching the video later that maybe don't have access to the chats, you can pause and get that code. And we can, of course, drop the link in the chats, no problem. I'm going to talk about our 6 elements of change, and you'll see playfulness show up a lot in these pieces. One is changing on purpose. So we want to start with purpose, humanizing change, co-creating change, learning to change, embracing emergent change, and sustaining change. I'm going to go quickly through these so we can get into some live play together. So changing on purpose, that's really about clarifying the purpose. If we're not clear on it ourselves, then we're already starting off on a bad foot. But if we don't clarify it with others, then that's going to be difficult as well. And we want to make sure we're aligned to purpose and values. And when we do these things, when we have a really clear purpose and people understand the why and they can peer into this bright future, then we can more safely move into spaces of play. Because if we just go into play without understanding why, that's when we start to get that pushback. That's when people start to feel like I'm being silly. Is there a reason that we're even doing these things? We also want to humanize the change, and play is human. Right? And so if we're moving into these very human experiences, because change requires us to even adjust how we think about ourself and how we identify with who we are in the world. And if we're really tying into that and working toward understanding what's the spectrum of support, or like where are there pockets of resistance, and understanding the emotions behind that, because often this resistance isn't this subterfuge that we might think of. It's more about the emotions that are at play. Can we understand it? Can we even explore that in a playful way and bring people together to truly just show up as humans? Finally, or third, we have co-create the change. And that means we're going to not just set this vision and say, this is exactly how we're going to get there and have this unchangeable idea of where we're going, but we're going to explore, we're going to adapt together and figure out where we're going. If anyone's familiar with agile development or iterative processes, prototyping, this is exactly what we're talking about, but we can do that in how we change our processes, how we change the way we organize, how we change the way we work. And then the play can be really powerful in this co-creation piece, right? Because co-creation is a lot of exploration. It's a lot of understanding each other. It's a lot of saying yes and. So you can imagine improvisation type of activities and moments that we design to allow everyone to have a voice. We believe that, nobody's as smart as everybody. And so if we can bring everyone to the table and unleash everyone, then we can prototype to learn and move forward in a really inclusive way. We're going to learn to change. And this is really important because we have to take a step back and have some meta moments around how do we become more playful as an organization, more curious as an organization? How do we get better at storytelling, at building narratives, at celebrating our mistakes? So you'll notice there's a lot of play and curiosity and experimentation happening in this ability to learn to change. We have to remove the rigidity that we might have about the way we work and the way that we even just show up in the world. And that requires changing our outlook and even just how we think about what change is. And then embracing the emergent change. And this is really about making sure we're really tying in or keying in on the ambiguity and the adaptiveness of the world, and how, we might be in a fog. We may not have all the information, but how can we make decisions together, and how can we stay curious and make sure that we're in this moment of human-centered problem finding and understanding, just like we would with product developments, how we're changing ourselves and our environments. And we just make sure we stay in that moment of discovery. And not just get to the point where like, oh, we got there, we made this change, because we have to understand that things are going to continue to evolve, and we should make sure that we really listen to that and stay attuned to it. Sustaining the change, this is how we make sure we promote and acknowledge within inside the organization who is living this playful vision of the future, who is leading with curiosity. Let's promote, let's acknowledge them, let's celebrate them. Let's cycle in new leaders so they have opportunities to practice and to help lead the change so that it's fresh and new. And let's make sure we're designing for nonlinear change. Let's not assume that we're just going from point A to point B. There's a very circuitous path, and that's where the learning happens. That's where we can let some of our boundaries down and really just follow the patterns that are kind of before us. So with that, I want to jump into this Miro board for a quick little bit of play, because I want to just give you some background on our thinking on why play is so important, and it can be serious. Let's engage in seriously playful activity. It's one of my favorite principles from the Liberating Structures framework. And today I put together this very, very simple Miro board. And it's broken up into a few sections. And if I hit the right button, and of course it's not toggling for me, so bear with me. I had to change my tech around this morning. One moment. All right. Okay, there we are. So I'm just going to quickly show you this board, and I think we've got the link dropped in at the bottom, and I see some people already in there. And if you would just find the area that's designated by your birth date. And again, my tech is not cooperating, so sorry about that. But I won't be able to give you the visual on it just yet, but it's a pretty simple board. There's 4 sections: January to March, April to June, and also July to September, October to December. And I already see some folks dropping some sticky notes in. I want you just to think about a change that you have coming up in the way you work, and how you might invite more play into your work, into that change, and exploring where you might be heading. I want you to use Post-it notes, images, icons, whatever's emerging for you, and just drop those in. I see some donuts, so yeah, maybe some playful, colorful food. Although I will say this, as a facilitator, we got to watch out for that sugar rush. We don't want to crash people out too much. So think about how we have some sustaining energy. I see a finger pointing. One of my favorite activities to invite a little bit of play into a moment of making a decision. Let's say we're going to pick a leader or pick a facilitator for our group. I just ask everyone in the group to start pointing at each other, and we keep pointing until everyone's pointing at the same person, and that's how we make our quick decision. And we can model that stuff, those kinds of in-person playful behaviors in the virtual space using icons or other kinds of pointers. We just have to have placeholders for all our people. powerful if we're going to do those kinds of moves. Let's see. What else am I noticing here? We got some, and what's beautiful about this, like speaking in metaphor and visuals and whatnot, it can mean so many different things. So, I saw whatever the finger is, someone that dropped in and might have thought of something completely different. And so it allows us to move into some divergent thinking, right? Like we all interpret it in new ways. It's sort of like listening to your favorite song and hearing the completely wrong lyrics. So much fun, and it creates so much opportunity. In fact, that reminds me of a matrix activity, and it shows up in a lot of different facilitation frameworks where you'll brainstorm two different axes with a group in a matrix, and you start looking at the intersections of those things. In fact, there's a lot of songwriting techniques around this where I think Jeff Tweedy in his book of How to Write a Song, he was talking about, making a list of objects he sees in the room and maybe a list of verbs, and then he starts combining those verbs and those objects to make his brain go somewhere totally different. This kind of non-lateral thinking kind of activities that can really unlock new ways of thinking. Does anyone else having issues with the page loading? Oh gosh, sorry about that. Probably don't, this being such a short session, probably not a ton of time to do any live support there, but hopefully you might be able to check it out later. I'm going to scroll down here and I'm going to see it just for the video's sake. I'm going to just toggle back over and see if I can get get my slides working again. So I'm just going to, oh, great. So I'm just going to keep the screen up like this as I scroll around and talk about a little bit. Lots of fun stuff. Oh, we got two hands with feet, and that reminds me of how Jake Knapp always loves to do high fives at his in-person workshops. So, maybe thinking about what's the virtual version of a high five. Are people able to celebrate each other through, there's confetti, there's icons, there's ways to yes and each other, or getting people into even groups of two and breakouts to just have a celebratory moment. I'm also a big fan of giving people areas inside of the Miro board and just designate them by topics, or even assign them the people so they can go and celebrate there a little bit kind of remotely together. Just have a little visual moment together that's even potentially async. Gosh, there's a hammer and a nail. So I love this, so many things that people are dropping in here, and you could use this for so much inspiration, because I'm not quite sure what everyone had in mind. If anyone wants to drop in maybe stickies or little anecdotes on the side of any of these images as what's coming up for you, that'd be great. And also, I want to encourage you to drop in any either in the Miro board as little annotations of what you're noticing and what it means for you, but also you could drop in stuff in the chats too. I'd love to see loving the mountains in April and June. Yeah, I think landscapes and just bringing in nature is such a powerful way to think about metaphor and think about how our events might follow the arcs of time. In fact, we were doing some exploration around facilitation in VR, and that was super fun because we were you're moving through a physical space and time's elapsing, and you don't need a timer anymore because the sun's setting, and so that reminds you that the workshop's coming to an end. So yeah, nature, and I see some cherry blossoms. Any other things popping up for folks? Let me see what else I'm noticing here. And I just want to underscore, we're just kind of, as a group of people who've never met before, throwing these together. You can imagine if there's some affinity with your group, say it's your team and you're doing this together and just creating some collages, what sorts of things do you notice or become curious about and want to ask of the team? And making sure that there's time to have reflection together. I'm just doing some live noticings here as I'm kind of on the presentation side, but if there was 6 to 12 of us actually chatting, we could unpack this a little bit. We could say, hey, what does this mean for us? And these kinds of things can create levels of vulnerability and start to build trust that's quite deep and powerful, because then that can find its way into other moments when we're working together. Let's see. Yes, someone was talking about a sense of motion is kind of surfacing at a macro level. That's interesting. And that's probably not surprising, as I kind of anchored us a bit on change and kind of this forward momentum. And so if there's motion happening, people are maybe we're already thinking a bit about where they might be headed, or and then playing with props. Yes. In fact, like, especially in the virtual world, I love sending stuff to people, a package where they can open it up and have a shared experience. Or even, one of my favorite warm-ups or even just connection activities in a workshop remotely is something we call Touch Blue. And that's where we just have people start with a color, and everyone tries to find something of that color. And we share the object, and we say, oh, look, like, what are you holding up? What is that? And then it just creates a little bit of connection, a little bit of fun. And then the next person, we just kind of do a round robin where the whoever gets chosen as the winner, kind of the best thing for that color, picks the next color and the next winner, and we kind of go around. Giving participants a few questions to trigger research prior to this type of brainstorm would increase participation. Yes, absolutely. Especially if you have an affinity group, right? And so, and anytime you're talking about doing what a lot of people call icebreakers or warm-ups or eye-openers or energizers, anytime you can kind of anchor it into the thread of what you're doing. Right? Like what sort of change do we have on the horizon? I generally keep it a bit open in these public kind of large group things, because it's hard to predict where everyone's thinking and what's going to draw them in, and just experiencing it and unpacking it and kind of thinking about how it could be useful is helpful in the meta sense. But yes, if you're going to bring it into your organization, think clearly about what. And coming back to Peggy Holman's thing I was telling you earlier, what is that question, that curious question that attracts people in? So if there's a research project or something that you have going on, there's a similar activity that we have a Miro board for called the Team Bookshelf, and we invite people to share the books that have been inspiring to them or what they're currently reading, and we just put images of the books on the bookshelf, and then we start to talk about them and what they mean for us individually and for the work we're doing. And it's quite a nice way to connect and learn from each other. And yeah, as we're kind of coming closer to the end here, definitely want to invite questions in the chat, or again, notice things. I might while I'm waiting for that, I might zoom in on some of the stickies and see what we have here. Take a moment to paint the picture from start to finish. That reminds me, this whole notion of start to finish. Big fan of M.G. Taylor. There's some of the originators of a lot of working in these ways, and I just interviewed them. They're in their 80s. I just finally interviewed both of them for the podcast, and that should be coming out in December. And one of their axioms is, you can't get there from here, but you could get here from there. And it's basically a nod toward backwards design, and this idea that if we're sitting here imagining our future, it's going to be really hard to think about all the steps that we need to take to get to that future, to materialize that future, to see that change through. But if we envision the future, if we start doing like a pre-mortem, or we start doing things like cover story or postcard to the future, or some of these creative activities to imagine that future state, then we can start working, well, what would happen right before that? And what would happen right before that? And what would be necessary for that to emerge? And what would happen before that? And so finally we get really close to something similar to where we are today. And now we've got kind of our path forward. So I love this idea of painting that picture, but also think about how you work your way backwards. That can be a really, really powerful way to kind of expose the steps and things. And thank you, Amanda, for dropping in Peggy's link. Very cool. And let's see, how many strategies for helping people feel more playful so as to heighten the mood? Sometimes icebreakers are not on the agenda. Yeah, I agree. Like what I was saying earlier was tying into the why. Like a lot of times when there's pushback or resistance, or it's hard to get people to engage, usually they don't understand why they're being asked to do something. So that's the number one place to start, and make sure that folks are informed. And if it is tied into the work, so it's really clear how there's a direct line to doing this is going to unlock things. Also, this is a muscle, right? We have to understand where people are today, and we basically nudge them on that journey. And the more we can continue to encourage the behaviors and do a little bit and then a little bit more and a little bit more, it can be very powerful. So don't expect people just to go from 0 to 100 like on day one, or just immediately out of the gate. We have to kind of get people loosened up and warmed up. A lot of times improv activities can be a great way to do this. Also, one thing we really, really, really believe in is this idea of connection before content. And so as much as we can, leaning into who these people are and how they might know each other or better understand each other. So, and you can even take something as simple as introductions and frame it in a way that encourages people to be absurd, to be a little bit ridiculous, right? And then that will allow them to begin to get into the headspace of like, okay, maybe this isn't about being correct. It's not about being wrong. Getting people into kind of active, like one of my favorite activities is, ideas that'll get me fired. Or, there's an activity from Liberating Structures called Triz, where we're gonna think about all the ways that we could mess this up. And it's a lateral thinking approach to thinking about the things that we're doing that are getting in our way. What are the counterproductive behaviors that are already there? And so there's some ways that you can use structure to invite people in. And then the thing is, it's very addictive. Once you get people kind of moving in these ways, then it can really unlock those parts of the brain, and people tend to do more and more and more and more of it. And so anyway, those are all my tips. And I think it takes a lot of practice and a lot of dedication and care and understanding. And definitely, whatever you do, don't take it personally. People come to us for facilitation certification and training all the time. And one of the things that they ask us is, how do I handle difficult behavior? And my response is always like, the first thing you have to do is you got to stop framing it as difficult. Sorry. They come to us and they ask about difficult people. How do I handle difficult people? And the first thing I tell them is, the first step in all of this is making sure you stop thinking of them as difficult people and think about it as dysfunctional behavior. There's behaviors that are not aligned with what you're trying to accomplish. And as soon as you frame it as that, then we stop. It's less reductive. We're not demonizing the people. We can understand that, hey, we can shift that behavior, right? And it's not about that person being problematic. It's about this moment being difficult for me. And why are they struggling? What emotions are they going through? What's their perspective? And how might I be able to shift that in some meaningful way? Excellent. Let's see. What else? A lot of stuff floating by in the chat. Let me see if I can kind of scroll up and just see if there's anything to kind of call out here. Can I ask what? Oh, yes. The podcast is called Control the Room. And if it's on Spotify, Apple, all the places that you find podcasts, or you can go to our website, voltagecontrol.com. And there under resources, there's a podcast link. And in fact, at voltagecontrol.com, under resources, you'll find a ton of Miro boards. And they're not all in the Miroverse because it takes a minute to put them all in and get approved. And so we've got a ton of Miro boards that we've released just sharing the RTB backup files. I think there's like 100, including the team bookshelf that I mentioned, all of our change templates where you're kind of assessing risk and reward of change, and some other kind of playful things. We've got an activity called Yarn Weave that we did with Funli Damone that allows people to, we actually brought in images to spawn memories of stories, and people will grab the images, put it inside of a picture frame to begin telling their stories of what emerged for them. And then anybody that relates to that story from any reason whatsoever will pull a connection line from the image of a pack of yarn and connect to that story. And then one of those people will share a story, their image, and anyone that connects to that story will draw a connection. And over time, you've got this giant web of yarn that's connected. Really fun to do that live in a room when you've got a bunch of yarn flying across the room, but certainly fun to model that in Miro. And all that's available under the resources section. Lots of different templates and ideas for play. But the thing I want to really encourage is, just be creative, be inventive. Think about coming back to the question, the point about what are we trying to accomplish? What research are we doing? Are we asking the team to do? And then think about what would be a playful way to do this. How can we get absurd? What would be the opposite? What would be the bizarro world version of this? And then can we invite people to just shift their perspective and be weird and bizarre for a little bit and try it in a new way. And yes, thank you for pointing out the Ask Me Anything, and that there's plenty of other opportunities to connect and try other ways to learn. And I just want to say thanks. I think we're about a minute left here, coming up on time. And I will say this, if I can bring up my my slides again, I will just drop in this image of my LinkedIn. If anyone wants to connect, I'm available and love to make friends and stay in touch. And it was a pleasure seeing all the comments and all the awesome images y'all brought into the Miro. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Douglas. Thank you, everyone. You can find more of Douglas in our community forum and on his LinkedIn. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.